I never thought that the deepest wound of my life would come from my own child's hand. It was a Sunday evening, and the smell of rosemary chicken still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of apple pie cooling on the counter. My old oak dining table, polished to a soft glow, groaned under the weight of casseroles, mashed potatoes, and the kind of laughter that skips across generations. The silverware chimed gently with every movement. My youngest grandson, Gabriel, had just made a silly joke, and someone, probably my son, was refilling the wine glasses. And then, it happened. A sharp crack, sudden and cruel. Her palm against my cheek. I can still feel the sting, hot, humiliating, intimate in the worst way. My skin burned, but it was the silence that cut deepest. No one moved. No one gasped. They just kept chewing, sipping, pretending. My husband adjusted his glasses, eyes downcast. My son reached for the breadbasket. Even the children kept their eyes glued to their plates, as though nothing had happened. My daughter, Miranda, stood tall, eyes glittering with something I didn't recognize anymore. Not grief, not anger. Power, perhaps. Control. She tilted her chin, daring me to speak. I didn't. I couldn't. My hand trembled as I reached for my water glass, the rim cool and wet against my fingertips. A single droplet slid down the side, catching the candlelight. That tiny, shimmering tear of water mirrored the one that refused to fall from my own eye. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. The kind that screams. I looked around the table, desperate for one pair of eyes to meet mine with outrage, sympathy, anything. Nothing. They swallowed my shame with their dinner. I smoothed the hem of my blouse with practiced fingers, a nervous tic from years of hiding wrinkles and worries. That night, when the dishes were washed and the chairs pushed in, I sat alone in my room, the faint scent of lavender from the drawer liners doing little to soothe me. I stared at the family portraits lining the wall. All those smiles, all those years, and for the first time in my life, I questioned everything I'd built. My cheek burned red, but the ache in my heart reached marrow deep. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ticking of the clock on my bedside table grew louder with each second, like a metronome measuring out my humiliation. I dabbed my cheek with a cool washcloth, its cotton worn soft by decades of use, but it did nothing to soothe the deeper bruise. Not the one on my skin, the one on my soul. I kept replaying the scene in my mind. Over and over. Her hand. The sound. The quiet. The refusal of every person I loved to acknowledge what had happened. I told myself there must have been some reason. Maybe they were in shock. Maybe they didn't understand. But the truth was simpler and crueler. They didn't want to get involved. At breakfast, my husband poured his coffee as usual, the scent rich and bitter, filling the kitchen. He asked if I wanted toast. Toast. After my daughter struck me. Toast. I nodded wordlessly and spread butter on it with a shaking hand, watching it melt into the crust like grief dissolving into habit. Later that day, I stood before the wall of family portraits again. My fingers traced the frames. Gabriel's kindergarten photo, our wedding day in black and white, Miranda's high school graduation. There she was, smiling in her cap and gown, holding my hand. How did we go from that moment to this? I waited, hoping someone would call. To check on me. To apologize on her behalf. Even to ask if I was okay. But the phone stayed silent. The silence became a companion, pressing in around me, whispering the truth I didn't want to admit. I was alone in this house, even when it was full of people. I folded laundry just to keep my hands busy, socks, towels, Gabriel's little t-shirts he sometimes left behind. As I folded, I noticed how methodical I'd become, as if putting things in neat stacks could bring order to my unraveling life. And that's when I realized something had shifted inside me. It wasn't rage, not yet. It wasn't even sorrow. It was the first crack in the dam, a quiet knowing that things would never be the same again. I just didn't know yet what I would do about it. This wasn't the first time Miranda had disrespected me, not by a long shot. I still remember the first time she called me irrelevant. We were sitting on the porch, the scent of lemon balm heavy in the summer air. I had gently suggested she slow down her spending after her second divorce. She rolled her eyes and said, "You wouldn't understand. You're out of touch with how the world works now." She sipped her iced tea, her nails tapping rhythmically against the glass, and looked past me like I was part of the furniture. I laughed it off, said nothing. That's what mothers do, right? We let things go. We tell ourselves our children are just stressed, tired, frustrated. We tuck the insults away like lint in our pockets, always thinking tomorrow will be better. But Miranda didn't stop. After her father died, my gentle Harold, who always buffered her sharper edges, something in her hardened. She stepped in to help with the finances. At first, I was grateful. The paperwork overwhelmed me, but then she started speaking to me like I was a child. Telling me what I could and couldn't spend. Taking my checkbook. Asking for receipts. She said it was for my own good. And I, foolishly, maybe, let her. Because I thought it meant she cared. I even remember the first time she rifled through my drawers without asking. I was making chamomile tea, the smell calming but faint compared to the rising tension. I heard her upstairs, drawers opening and closing. She claimed she was just organizing. I told myself not to overreact. She's my daughter, I thought. She's looking out for me. But the truth, which I'd kept locked away, came roaring forward that night she slapped me. All the little dismissals, all the ways she chipped away at my dignity over the years. That moment was not the beginning, it was the boiling point. As I dusted the mantelpiece the morning after, my hand brushed the porcelain music box Harold gave me on our 40th anniversary. It played a slow, waltzing tune when wound. I opened it, letting it sing softly into the quiet room. I hadn't played it in years. And suddenly, I knew. Forgiveness had carried me far. But it would carry me no further. 3 days later, I stood in my lawyer's office, heart racing, but hands steady. The room smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish, and the ticking wall clock sounded louder than it should have. I wore my best navy cardigan, the one with the tiny pearl buttons I always fiddled with when nervous. I hadn't worn it since Harold's funeral. It seemed appropriate. I was, in a way, burying something else that day. "I want to change my will," I said. Mr. Sanders looked up from his desk, startled. "All right," he said carefully. "What are we changing?" I swallowed hard. The words caught in my throat, but I pushed them out, steady and clear. "I want to remove my daughter, Miranda, as a beneficiary. I want everything to go directly to my grandchildren, and a portion to the Heritage Literacy Fund." Harold believed in that cause. So do I. He didn't ask why. Perhaps he already knew. Or maybe the look in my eyes told him more than I could say. When I left the office, the sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a golden light over the sidewalk. I paused outside a bakery, drawn in by the smell of cinnamon and rising dough. I bought myself a warm apple turnover, just because. The pastry flaked in my fingers, sweet and buttery, and I sat on a bench to eat it slowly, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I didn't tell anyone. Not my husband, not my son, not even the grandchildren. Especially not Miranda. I let her go on believing she held all the power. Let her keep thinking I was weak, confused, too sentimental to ever act. Let her underestimate me. That night, I poured myself a cup of mint tea and sat in my armchair, wrapped in the faded quilt my mother stitched when I married Harold. The scent of tea leaves mingled with lavender from the sachet tucked inside the cushion. For the first time in years, I felt I had drawn a boundary no one could erase. The slap didn't destroy me. It awakened me. Weeks passed, and life resumed its rhythm, on the surface, at least. Miranda came by now and then, sweeping through the house with that same clipped tone and purposeful stride. She never knocked anymore. Just turned the handle and entered like it was already hers. The scent of her expensive perfume always arrived a moment before she did, sharp, floral, suffocating. She'd rummage through the pantry, flicking labels, inspecting dates, as if appraising the spoils of a soon-to-be inheritance. She never asked. She assumed. One afternoon, she sat in Harold's old recliner, scrolling through her phone with one hand while sipping my lemon water with the other. "We really ought to think about selling the house soon, you know," she said casually. "It's too much for you." I smiled, nodding as if I agreed. "You may be right," I murmured, folding the same corner of my apron over and over in my lap. The cotton was warm from where it had rested against my skin all day, and the gesture, small, repetitive, kept me grounded. Inside, I burned. She didn't know. She couldn't possibly know that the house no longer had her name attached to anything. She was standing in the very home she thought would fund her future, completely unaware that it was already spoken for, already protected. And I took a strange comfort in that. That night, I pulled out the small cedar box I keep tucked under my bed. Inside were birth certificates, old photographs, and the updated copy of my will, signed, stamped, official. I ran my fingers over the thick paper, the ink slightly raised where my pen had pressed down in finality. She thought she had time. She thought silence meant surrender. Let her think so. In the quiet afterward, I lit a vanilla-scented candle and let its soft glow fill the room. I watched the flame flicker, steady but alive. Like me, still here, still in control. One Sunday morning, I found myself lingering after service, the scent of beeswax and lilies still clinging to the chapel air. The sermon had been about mercy, how forgiveness frees the soul. But my heart remained heavy, not with anger, but with uncertainty. After the crowd thinned, I spotted Lillian sitting near the back, her purse in her lap, her usual wide-brimmed hat perched slightly crooked. She was the kind of woman who'd buried a husband, raised 5 boys, and still had the grace to iron her linens every Tuesday. She had the eyes of someone who had endured quietly and survived. "Lillian," I said softly, sitting beside her. My voice cracked like old wood. "Can I ask you something?" She turned to me, her perfume faintly rose-scented, her gloved hands folded with a calm I envied. "Of course. I've disinherited Miranda," I confessed. "I haven't told her. I haven't told anyone, really. But I had to. After what she did, I couldn't reward that." Lillian didn't blink. She reached over, her hand resting on mine, warm, soft, firm. "Am I cruel for doing this?" I whispered, watching a shaft of light dance through the stained glass onto the floor. "No, dear," she said, her voice low and steady. "You're protecting your dignity. Sometimes justice must come from our own hands, especially when no one else will lift a finger." I stared down at our hands, hers weathered and sure, mine trembling slightly, the skin thin and spotted. That simple touch steadied me. She wasn't judging. She understood. We sat like that for a while, saying nothing more, just letting the stillness settle. That evening, I baked a peach cobbler, not because I needed dessert, but because the smell of cinnamon and fruit bubbling in the oven reminded me of better times. As it baked, I tucked a handwritten note into the cedar box with the will. It read, "This was not done in anger. It was done in love, for myself, and for the generations that follow." After that Sunday, something in me settled. The kind of peace that comes not from winning, but from finally choosing yourself. I started with the photo albums, the thick, leather-bound ones that lived in the hallway closet, smelling faintly of dust and cedar. I spent hours at the kitchen table, sorting through decades of birthdays, first days of school, and family trips where someone was always sunburnt or scowling. I labeled each page with careful notes. Gabriel's first bike ride, age 5, Claire's recital, pink tutu, stubborn curls. For every grandchild, I made a box. Inside, I placed not just mementos, but meaning. The brooch my mother gave me the day I got engaged, Harold's old cufflinks, letters he wrote during our first years of marriage, faded, but still smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and lemon soap. I included letters of my own, handwritten and full of memories, advice, apologies I never said aloud. I told them what I'd learned the hard way, that kindness without boundaries invites harm, that silence in the face of cruelty is a kind of betrayal, to oneself most of all. Every morning, I made my tea, strong black, with a splash of cream, and wrapped myself in my knitted shawl, the one with the fraying edge I keep meaning to repair. I always did my thinking best with warm wool over my shoulders and a mug in my hands. Some afternoons I wandered the garden, pruning lavender and deadheading the roses. The scent clung to my fingers like perfume. I began to set aside certain plants for transplanting, ones I knew Gabriel might like for his new home, or that reminded me of Claire's allergies when she was small. Even in these small gestures, I was choosing legacy over vengeance. And the will? It was updated again, nothing drastic, but cleaner. No ambiguities, no room for interpretation. Mr. Sanders nodded approvingly when I showed him my list of attached letters and labeled items. Most people never prepare this well, he said. But I wasn't preparing for death. I was preparing for truth. One evening, as I polished the silver teapot Harold bought on our anniversary trip to Savannah, I caught my reflection in the rounded metal. My face was lined, yes, but calm. Grounded. I had not lost my mind. I had not become bitter. I was simply no longer willing to be erased. Everything was ready. All that remained was time. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I had just finished folding the last of the laundry, crisp towels still warm from the dryer, smelling faintly of lavender and sun. I was placing Harold's old gardening gloves into a storage bin, carefully tucking them beside my seed packets, when I heard the front door slam open with a force that made the windows rattle. Miranda. She didn't call ahead. She didn't even knock. I walked into the living room, wiping my hands on the hem of my apron, and there she was, standing in the doorway like a storm in heels, clutching her purse to her chest like it held a weapon. Her lipstick was too red, her perfume overwhelming, like she'd sprayed it on in anger. "Where's your will, Mother?" she snapped. "I need to know what's written. Now." Her tone hit me harder than her hand ever had. Cold, sharp, entitled. As if my life, my choices, belonged to her. I blinked slowly, willing my heartbeat to stay steady. "It's the same as always," I said, my voice calm. Too calm. Her eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring just slightly, a childhood tell she never outgrew. "Don't lie to me," she said, stepping forward, her heels clicking across the hardwood like a ticking bomb. "You've been acting strange, writing things down, whispering with lawyers. What's going on?" I smiled, the way I used to when she was 5 and throwing a tantrum in the grocery store. "You worry too much," I said lightly. "Maybe you're projecting." That infuriated her. I could see it in the way she gripped the back of the dining chair, her fingers white at the knuckles. "Don't patronize me," she hissed. I shrugged gently and turned away, smoothing the edge of the tablecloth with fingers that had ironed that same cloth for nearly 40 years. "If something's changed, you'll find out eventually. That's how wills work." Her silence filled the room like smoke. Heavy, suffocating. Then she scoffed, flipped her hair, and stormed out, the door slamming behind her once again. I stood still for a long time after she left, my fingertips resting on the edge of the table, feeling the soft fabric, tracing the embroidered tulips. My knees ached. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from restraint. The truth was dangerously close to the surface now. She suspected, and I knew. This was only the beginning. For a while, things quieted down. Almost too quiet. Miranda stopped visiting unannounced. No phone calls, no sharp texts, no guilt-laced voice messages. The silence should have worried me, but instead, it felt like stepping into warm bathwater after weeks of cold rain. I let myself sink into it. I spent those days tending the garden more carefully than I had in years. The roses needed pruning, the hydrangeas were thirsty, and the mint had run wild like a child left unsupervised. There was something deeply comforting about dirt beneath my fingernails and the smell of crushed basil on my palms. Life made sense out there. You watered, things grew. You neglected, things withered. No manipulation, no betrayal. Inside the house, I returned to my routines, the good kind. I baked scones, my lemon blueberry recipe that always reminded me of summers with Harold. I ironed pillowcases while watching old British mysteries. I rearranged the tea cabinet, lining up my boxes like tiny soldiers: chamomile, mint, Earl Grey, and the hibiscus blend Claire always liked when she visited. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself enjoy the sound of my own breath. I wasn't being watched, questioned, invaded. The doorbell didn't ring. My privacy was mine again. Miranda, it seemed, had retreated. I even began to hope, just a little, that maybe she had accepted it. Maybe she'd found peace in her own life, some new obsession to control. Maybe she'd finally stopped seeing me as a chess piece in her financial game. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with Gabriel, just the two of us. He was showing me photos from his college robotics club, full of wires and blinking lights I didn't understand, but loved hearing about anyway. The sun was low, casting that honey-colored light that made even the peeling porch paint look golden. "You seem different lately, Grandma," he said, sipping the iced tea I'd made. "Lighter." I smiled. "I think I am." And I meant it. In that moment, I believed I had weathered the worst. That I had faced the storm and come out whole on the other side. But I should have known better. Miranda never lets go. It was a Tuesday, cloudy, with the kind of air that makes your knees ache before the rain comes. I had just finished steeping a pot of chamomile, the steam rising gently, filling the kitchen with its soft, honeyed scent. The same tea I always made on quiet afternoons, wrapped in my shawl, letting peace settle into the folds of the day. Then the front door flew open. No knock, no warning. Miranda. She stormed in, hair disheveled, cheeks flushed, her mouth twisted into that familiar sneer of righteousness she wore like armor. The door slammed behind her so hard the glass in the hutch rattled. I held my teacup steady, though my fingers tightened slightly around the handle. "You took me out of the will?" she screamed. The words hung in the air, thick as thunder. I didn't flinch. I simply lowered the cup to its saucer with care, the ceramic clinking softly. "So, you found out." She threw her purse onto the floor like a child tossing a tantrum, eyes wild. "How dare you," she spat. "After everything I've done for you." I stood. Slowly. The ache in my joints reminded me that age demands grace, even in confrontation. "What exactly have you done for me, Miranda?" She blinked. "I've managed things. Protected you. Looked after the estate. You've taken control," I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. Stronger than I'd felt in years. "You've made decisions without asking. You've spoken to me like I'm senile. You struck me in front of my family and watched them ignore it, because you trained them to treat me like a burden." Her mouth opened, then closed. No denial. Just a sharp inhale and a trembling lip. I stepped closer, the hem of my cardigan brushing against my ankles. "Yes," I said. "I changed the will. Because I will not leave my legacy in the hands of cruelty." She stared at me, stunned. For the first time in years, she looked small. And still, I felt a pang. Not pity. Something older. A mother's ache. The memory of a girl who once begged me to braid her hair before school. The child who slept on my chest during fevers and held my hand too tightly in crowds. But that girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had treated me like an obstacle. She turned sharply, rage bubbling to the surface. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll die alone." "I've been alone for years," I said quietly. "I just finally realized it." The rain began then, soft at first, tapping the window pane like fingertips. My tea had gone cold. But I didn't care, because the pretending was over. She kept shouting, but I no longer heard her. Not in the old way, not with the sharp, stomach-clenching panic that used to rise in me like bile. I heard her voice the way one hears distant thunder, threatening, yes, but far away. Manageable. I had finally stepped out from under her weather. She called me insane, selfish, said I was destroying the family. But I stood taller than I had in years, my back no longer curved in apology. "Yes," I said, my voice even. "I did take you out of the will. Because the moment you struck me, and the others looked away, I realized something I should have seen long ago." Her mouth twitched. "You believed I would forgive you. that I would accept it. Because I always have. Every sharp word, every condescending glance, every time you counted my money before I was even gone. The room smelled of old wood and something bitter, maybe her perfume, maybe the guilt beginning to rise in her throat. But this time, I said, smoothing the edge of my sleeve with a steady hand, you miscalculated. She scoffed. You're just bitter. No, I said, I'm clear. I turned and walked to the small writing desk Harold built me in our second year of marriage. The drawer stuck slightly, as it always did, before sliding open to reveal a stack of manila envelopes. I pulled out one labeled simply, recordings. Her face paled. She knew. I saw it in her eyes, the exact second the memory returned. My phone on the counter. Her voice rising. The insults, the threats, the things she never thought I'd keep. I prepared for this, I said. Months ago. She looked at the envelope like it might burn her fingers. And if you ever try to challenge me legally, I continued, laying the envelope gently on the table, this will go straight to the court. Along with a statement, and witnesses. She laughed, a short, brittle sound. You wouldn't. I already have, I replied. It's in a safe. My lawyer has a copy. And if anything happens to me suddenly, everything goes straight to the authorities. The room was utterly still. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to pause. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't wept. I had simply said what needed saying. For once, it was she who trembled. That's when I knew, I had taken my life back. And she no longer knew what to do with me. Miranda screamed. Not words at first, just raw sound, like an animal cornered. Then came the accusations, pouring out faster than I could catch them. Manipulative, ungrateful, insane. The insults she hurled were familiar, worn out from overuse, but they no longer stuck to me like they used to. They slid off, like water off wax. I stayed where I was, standing beside Harold's desk, my hand resting lightly on the envelope. Not clutching it, just touching it. The paper was warm now, absorbing the heat from my palm. It felt like a seal, a quiet promise to myself that I would never again be gaslit into silence. She didn't know everything, of course. She didn't know about the audio files, copied and stored on a flash drive in the fireproof safe hidden behind my winter coats. She didn't know that I had documented each visit, every time she entered without knocking, every moment she raised her voice. I had taken notes on dates, times, exact words. Cold, methodical, not out of spite, out of survival. I had even made recordings when I didn't want to, holding my phone in my cardigan pocket, praying it wouldn't buzz or light up. I felt ashamed at first, like a spy in my own home. But now I saw it for what it was, insurance. Not just against her threats, but against the slow erosion of my truth. I wasn't losing my mind. I was protecting it. I remembered the night I placed that safe behind the coats. The smell of cedar from the closet boards. My hands trembling only slightly as I spun the dial, then placed the documents and flash drive inside, along with a letter addressed to Mr. Sanders. If something happens to me under suspicious circumstances, the letter read, do not assume old age. Assume injustice. I had even gone so far as to include a backup plan, Claire. Sweet Claire, my eldest granddaughter, now nearly 20 and sharper than her mother ever was. I'd emailed her a single line months ago, encrypted, ask Mr. Sanders if anything ever seems wrong. I never explained it, but she had responded with a simple heart emoji. Now, standing in front of Miranda, I saw all of that groundwork like roots beneath my feet. Invisible, but unshakable. She could scream, she could insult. But she could not undo what I had built. Not this time. You've gone mad, she said again, quieter now, the fight starting to leave her shoulders. You've let them turn you against me. I almost laughed. No, I said softly, you did that all by yourself. And then, like fate itself stepping into the room, the hallway creaked. We both turned. There stood Claire. Claire stood in the doorway, frozen. She held her phone loosely in one hand, earbuds dangling from her neck. She had that look, equal parts guilt and resolve, the kind children wear when they've overheard too much. Her eyes moved between us slowly, taking in Miranda's flushed face, my calm stance, the envelope still resting on the desk like a declaration. "I saw you slap Grandma," Claire said, her voice steady, clear. "That night, at dinner." Miranda's eyes widened, her mouth opening in a silent gasp, but no words came. "I didn't say anything," Claire continued, stepping into the room, "because I didn't know what to do. I was scared, I guess. Not of you hurting me, but of how everyone just pretended nothing happened." The silence thickened. The grandfather clock chimed from the hallway, 5 solemn notes. Claire walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch soft and grounding. Her fingers smelled faintly of lilac hand lotion, and something deeper settled in my chest, a kind of homecoming I hadn't felt in years. "But I can't stay quiet anymore," she said, turning to face her mother. "Grandma isn't crazy. She's not cruel. She's just finally standing up to you." Miranda looked like she might be sick. She glanced at me, then back at Claire. "You're taking her side? After everything I've done for this family?" Claire laughed, but it was brittle, broken. "You've done things to this family, Mom. Not for it. We all saw it. We just didn't know how to stop you." I stood silently, letting Claire speak truths I had carried alone for too long. There was a crack in Miranda's composure now, her eyes darted, her lips parted as if searching for a script that no longer worked. "I've seen the way you treat her," Claire continued. "I saw you go through her mail. I heard you call her dead weight. I even heard you say she was senile." "That was taken out of context," Miranda stammered. "No," Claire said, "it wasn't. I felt my knees go weak, but not from fear. From the sheer release of it all. Someone else had seen. Someone else had heard. I wasn't alone anymore." I reached up and gently squeezed Claire's hand. "Thank you, sweetheart." She turned to me, eyes full of something fierce and protective. "You don't have to thank me, Grandma. You just have to let us help you now." Miranda backed away slightly, as though the truth had weight and it was pressing down on her. The authority she'd always worn like a tailored coat was slipping from her shoulders. And I, at long last, was no longer afraid to watch it fall. Miranda's face twisted into something I barely recognized, rage, yes, but also fear. The kind of fear that comes when the world you've controlled starts slipping through your fingers. She looked at Claire, then at me, then back again, her eyes wild with disbelief. "How dare you gang up on me?" she spat, pointing a trembling finger. "You're a child. You don't know what you're talking about." Claire didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, chin lifted. "I'm not a child, Mom. I'm 21, and I know abuse when I see it." The word echoed. Abuse. Miranda recoiled like she'd been slapped herself. "She's turning you all against me," she hissed. "Don't you see that? She's manipulating everyone, lying." That's when the door opened again. Gabriel and my son, Daniel, stepped in. They'd heard the yelling from the driveway. I saw it in their faces, concern first, then understanding as their eyes took in the room. Me at Harold's desk, Claire by my side, and Miranda, unraveling. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, his voice cautious. Claire didn't wait. She found out Grandma changed her will. And now she's screaming and threatening her again. Again. The word landed like a stone. Gabriel stepped between us and Miranda. He didn't say a word, just stood there, tall, calm, arms at his sides. A silent wall. My sweet boy, who once cried when his goldfish died, now standing like a soldier. And Daniel, he looked at me, and something in his eyes softened. "Is it true?" he asked gently. "You changed the will?" "Yes," I said, my voice clear. "And I had every right to. I've endured years of Miranda's disrespect." The slap was just the final act. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, he looked at Miranda. I didn't see it. That night, I looked away. We all did. Miranda's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her power had always depended on secrecy, on whispers, on no one else speaking up. Now the silence was broken, and she had no script for this. "You can't do this to me," she finally gasped. "I'm your daughter." "No," I said, rising slowly to my feet, every joint aching but my spine straight as a beam of light. You were my daughter, until you decided I was disposable. Tears burned the corners of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet, not here. Miranda looked around the room, but no one stood with her. Not this time. And in that moment, I saw the truth ripple through her like a crack in glass. She was no longer feared. She was no longer believed. And she was no longer welcome. I gave you everything, I said, my voice shaking, but not from fear. From release. I gave you life, Miranda. I gave you love, patience, protection, even when you didn't deserve it. I gave you my home, my table, my trust. Tears welled in my eyes and spilled freely now, warm against my cheeks. But I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. Let her see what decades of quiet suffering looked like when it broke the surface. And you repaid me with violence and greed. She stood motionless in the middle of the room, surrounded by the same walls that had witnessed her baby steps, her tantrums, her weddings. The walls she thought would one day be hers. But now they closed in on her, not with warmth, but with judgment. You slapped me, I continued, in front of your family. Your children. And when no one said anything, I looked at their silence and realized, you taught them to treat me as if I were invisible. No, she whispered, but it was too late. I watched you dig through my drawers, belittle my mind, count the days until I died so you could divide what was never promised. I was trying to help, she croaked, a hollow echo of her old excuse. No, you were trying to own me, I said. But I am not property. I am not an obligation. I am not an old woman waiting to be harvested. Claire reached for my hand. Gabriel stood like a stone, and Daniel lowered his gaze, ashamed of how long he'd stayed silent. But I was not ashamed. Not anymore. You were no daughter of mine, I said, and the words came with the force of truth, not anger, not vengeance, but clarity. You were disinherited, not just on paper, but in my heart. The room held its breath. Miranda's face crumbled. You'll regret this, she whispered again, but her voice lacked power. She sounded like someone standing outside in the rain, trying to get back into a house where all the lights had been turned off. No, I replied. I regret nothing. There was no more to say. I turned away from her, walked back to the chair where I had folded my quilts, brewed my tea, held my memories. I sat down, each joint aching with the weight of what I'd carried for so long, and the lightness of setting it down. And for the first time, Miranda had no words. Just silence. This time, it was hers to bear. She left in a storm of footsteps and slammed doors. The whole house shook when the door closed behind her, and yet, inside me, there was stillness. I sat there for a long time after, Claire still by my side, Daniel staring at the floor, Gabriel hovering in the hallway as if unsure whether to stay or go. No one spoke. And then, slowly, they each came to me, one by one. Not with words, but with hands on shoulders, quiet apologies, long overdue embraces. The kind that say more than guilt ever could. That night, Miranda began to call. I didn't pick up. She left messages, furious, pleading, twisted versions of love. You'll change your mind, she said. You always do. I am your daughter. Then, you're sick. You need me. And later, I didn't mean it. Please, just call me back. But I didn't. I deleted each message after I listened, not out of cruelty, but because they were no longer mine to carry. Days passed. Then weeks. The messages grew fewer. Then they stopped. The silence returned, but this time it was mine. Not a punishment, not an absence, but a boundary. A clean line drawn around my peace. I spent my afternoons planting new lavender in the garden, the soil rich and dark beneath my fingers. The scent clung to my skin long after the sun set, reminding me that growth was always possible, at any age. My nights were quiet. I read old letters, wrote new ones, sat under Harold's patchwork quilt and watched the wind stir the curtains. Miranda had vanished from my daily life. But I hadn't lost a daughter. I had released a shadow. Now, the house is quiet, but not empty. Laughter echoes from the kitchen when Claire visits. Gabriel helps me with the garden, his hands clumsy but willing. Daniel checks in often, his silence is less guilty now, more present. The scent of fresh bread and blooming lavender fills the rooms. I sleep peacefully. The slap, once a source of humiliation, became my liberation. Not because it was deserved, but because it woke me up. I spent too many years believing love meant enduring everything. It doesn't. Sometimes, the boldest act of love is drawing a line, protecting your own soul, even from family. Miranda taught me that. So here I sit, wrapped in Harold's quilt, tea in hand, the evening sun warming my face. I am not alone. I am not bitter. I am free. And that, dear reader, is what dignity looks like.